The Westboro Baptist Church generally does not acknowledge the concept of wrongful convictions in the way most legal human rights organizations do. The idolatry is noted in extreme Calvinist beliefs, which emphasizes the divine predestination. Because of this, they often see legal judgments, including convictions and punishments, as manifestations of God's will, regardless of the circumstances. WBC has historically expressed support for harsh punishments, including the death penalty, and have celebrated the suffering of individuals that they've deemed sinful. They have known to protest outside of courthouses and prisons, often with inflammatory messages. Their belief system doesn't focus on the fairness of the judicial process, but rather on their interpretation of divine justice. If someone was convicted of a crime but later exonerated, WBC would likely see this as a part of God's plan rather than an error in the justice system. However, since their views are extreme and not legally grounded, they do not actively engage in discussions about wrongful convictions in the same way that civil rights groups, lawyers, and auxiliary advocacy organizations do. Okay. There are a few groups and perspectives that generally do not recognize wrongful convictions in the way that legal experts and innocent organizations do. Extremist religious groups. Some extremist groups like the Westboro Baptist Church believe that everything happens according to God's will, meaning a wrongful conviction is seen as justified. Certain strict Calvinist or fatalist religious sects may argue that all legal outcomes are predetermined and reflect divine justice. Authoritarian governments, some dictatorships and totalitarian regimes reject the idea of wrongful convictions because admitting mistakes undermines state power. Countries with weak judicial oversight or show trials, for example, Stalin's era, Soviet Union, North Korea, often deny that errors and injustice occur. Some law and order politicians and activists have believed that the legal system is infallible, or that any errors are non-negotiable compared to the needs of harsh enforcement. In the past decades, certain pro-death penalty organizations dismissed concerns about wrongful convictions through DNA evidence have shifted some of these views. Certain prosecutors and law enforcement officials. Some prosecutors refuse to admit mistakes, even when the evidence suggests wrongful convictions, fearing the damage to their reputation or office. Police officers and investigators who have built a case may resist acknowledging errors, and particularly in high-profile cases. For instance, victim advocacy groups. In certain specific cases, some victim rights groups may resist overturning of convictions, especially if it means reopening traumatic cases. They may argue that legal appeals already provide safeguards, even when the exoneration evidence emerges. Public with strong confirmation biases. Some people who strongly believe in the guilt of somebody even after exoneration, especially if the case is highly publicized. Cognitive biases and media influence can lead to the belief that the exonerations are technical loopholes rather than proof of innocence. Organizations like the Innocent Project's National Registry of Exonerations and many human rights groups work to free those falsely accused. Studies on wrongful conviction and forensic mistakes have increasingly pushed the legal system to acknowledge the reality of wrongful convictions. Many individual organizations and institutions recognize the reality of wrongful convictions and actively work to address these. Those include the Innocent Project and legal advocacy groups. The Innocent Project, one of the most well-known organizations, it uses DNA evidence to exonerate exonerate the wrongfully convicted. The National Registry of Exonerations documents and studies wrongful convictions to understand patterns and prevent future cases. The Equal Justice Initiative, founded by Brian Stevenson, it advocates for people wrongly convicted and those facing excessive punishment. Center on Wrongful Convictions. Based at Northwestern University, it focuses on the cases of actual innocence. The Death Penalty Information Center tracks wrongful convictions in capital punishment cases. Criminal justice reform advocates, human rights groups, for example, Amnesty International, ACLU, advocate for fair trials and highlight miscarriages of justice. Justice reform groups, many organizations working on sentencing reform, also address wrongful convictions. Some prosecutors and law enforcement officials, convictions integrity units, special units within some district attorney's offices that reviews past convictions for errors. Progressive prosecutors, some like Larry Kesner, Philadelphia, Marilyn Mosby, Baltimore, have overturned wrongful convictions. Retired law enforcement officials, some former police and FBI agents, support innocent work after seeing systematic flaws. Journalists and investigative journalists like those from the New York Times, the Marshall Project, ProPublica, and Serial, the podcast that expose wrongful convictions. TV shows like Making a Murderer, The Scarce Case, and The Innocent Man have raised awareness. Law enforcement is advocating for criminal justice reform. Some politicians push for wrongful conviction compensation and forensic science reforms. Supreme Court judges, some like former Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, have acknowledged flaws in the justice system. Scientific experts in forensic science, forensic reform groups. Many forensic experts push for better standards to prevent wrongful convictions based on junk science. Psychologists studying false confessions. Research on coerced confessions have shown how wrongful convictions happen. Exonerees and their family, those who are wrongly convicted and later exonerated, are often become advocates for justice reform. Groups like the Exoneree Network support former prisoners in adjusting to life after wrongful imprisonment. Wrongful convictions are increasingly recognized due to DNA evidence and forensic science and advancements, investigative journalism. Who parties wrongful convicted? Several groups and organizations, individuals actively protest against wrongful convictions through legal advocacy and public demonstrations of public and policy reform. These groups include the Innocence organizations. The Innocent Project, one of the most prominent organizations working to exonerate the wrongfully convicted through DNA evidence. The National Registry of Exonerations documents and analyze wrongful convictions to help prevent future injustices. The Equal Justice Initiative, led by Brian Stevenson, this group advocates for people wrongly convicted and those facing excessive sentences. The Center on Wrongful Convictions, based at Northwestern University, and this organization works on exoneration cases. Families and supporters of the wrongly convicted. Families and wrongly convicted individuals often protest outside courthouses, prisons, and government buildings to demand justice. Support groups like the Exoneree Network helps exonerees to advocate for justice reform. Civil rights and criminal justice reform. American Civil Liberties Union fight wrongly convictions by challenging unfair trials and poor legal representation. NAACP Legal Defense Fund works to defend the racial biases in wrongful convictions. Black Lives Matter, BLM, protests against systematic injustices in the criminal justice system, including wrongful convictions. Progressive prosecutors and legal reformers. Some conviction integrity units within the district attorney offices review post-convictions and advocate for exonerations. Progressive prosecutors such as Larry Kingsher felt that Philadelphia DA has taken steps to overturn wrongful convictions. Journalism and investigative reports. The Marshall Project and ProPublica and the New York Times and other investigative journalism outlets expose wrongful convictions. Podcasts and TV shows like Serial and Making a Murderer, The Innocent in the Staircase, bringing public attention to wrongful convictions. Advocate groups and nonprofits. The Death Penalty Center information highlights cases of wrongful convictions related to capital punishment, witness to the innocent, composed of exonerated death row survivors who campaign against wrongful convictions and the death penalty. Social media and online campaigns, hashtags like #FreeName and #wrongful convictions are used to rally support for individuals who have been wrongly convicted. Petitions on Change.com and MoveOn.com often gain widespread attention, leading to public pressure for exoneration. People and groups who protest against innocent individuals, even though there is strong evidence of wrongful conviction, often do so for various reasons, including biases, belief in the justice system's infallibility, political motivations, or personal connection to the case. These groups can include victim advocacy groups. Some victim families and advocacy group organizations strongly oppose exonerations and believing the original conviction was justified. Groups like Parents of Murdered Children sometimes resist efforts to overturn convictions, fame, reach traumatization. Some individuals emotionally invested in a case may reject new evidence, feeling justice was already served. Tough on crime advocates. Law and order politicians and advocates may insist on upholding convictions even when the evidence suggests innocence. Organizations that support harsh sentencing and the death penalty may expose exonerations to maintain faith in the system. Certain prosecutors and law enforcement officials. Some prosecutors refuse to admit mistakes because acknowledging wrongful convictions can damage their careers. Police officers and detectives who investigate the case may resist exonerations to protect their reputations. Some district attorney offices fight appeals and retrials, even in the cases with strong evidence of innocence. Political groups and extremist organizations. Extremist or political motivated groups may target certain defendants based on racial, religious, or idolatry biases. In some historical cases, racist organizations, for example, the KKK and white supremacist groups, have pressured courts to maintain wrongful convictions of black defendants. Groups pushing anti-immigrant or nationalist rhetoric may resist exonerations of individuals they see as outsiders. Public media and public misinformation. Sensationalization media coverage can create a lasting bias against defendants even after exoneration. Some true crime communities or armed detectives refuse to accept exonerations and continue to push conspiracy theories. Social media and public pressure. Online communities sometimes harass exonerees if they still believe they were guilty. High-profile exonerations, for example, Amanda Knox and Central Park 5, faced public backlash despite proven innocence. Similar extremist groups such as the Westboro Baptist Church view criminal convictions, even wrongful ones, as divine justice. Certain conservative religious factions have historically supported wrongful convictions in the cases involving moral issues. The Memphis 3, Damien Echols, Jason Baldwin, and Jesse Kelly Jr. were wrongly convicted of the 1993 murders of 3 young boys in Memphis, Arkansas. The case gained widespread support from activists, celebrities, and organizations, leading to their eventual release in 2011. Here are some of the key groups and individuals who protested for their support. Celebrities and public figures. Johnny Depp, one of the most vocal supporters, advocating for their innocence through interviews and events. Eddie Vedder, lead singer of Pearl Jam, raised awareness and financially supported the illegal efforts. Harry Rawlings organized benefit concerts, protests, produced an hour to raise funds for the defense. Natalie Maines, lead singer of the Chicks, publicly spoke about the case and faced lawsuits from local officials for her activism. Peter Jackson and Fran Roche, the filmmakers behind The Lord of the Rings, funded private investigations into the case. Margaret Cho, Metallica, Marilyn Monroe, among various entertainers who rose awareness. Legal and Justice Reform Organization. The Innocent Project, although not directly involved in their defense, it has highlighted their case as an example of wrongful convictions. Arkansas, Take Action, a grassroots movement that campaigned for their release. Justice for the Memphis 3, support fund and legal defense fund that helped finance new DNA testing. Filmmakers and documentary producers. Paradise Lost Trilogy, HBO, the documentary by Joe Bollinger and Bruce Bruce S. played a major role in the shifting public opinion. West Memphis, 2012. A film produced by Peter Jackson and Fran Roche further examined the case and exposed flaws in the prosecution. Grassroots advocates and fans, thousands of people worldwide protested at courthouses, held vigils, and signed petitions demanding their release. Open online community on forums, social media, websites dedicated to the case helped spread awareness. Legal experts and journalists, investigative reporters, and legal analysts uncover flaws in the prosecution's case, particularly false confessions and lack of physical evidence. Major protest and advocate groups, public demonstrations in Arkansas and other states, concerts and benefit events often feature musicians and advocates, social media campaigns demanding their release. The protest advocacy efforts ultimately helped lead to the Alpha plea deal in 2011, which allowed them to be released while maintaining their innocence. Despite the widespread support for Memphis 3, several groups and individuals protested against them, opposing their exoneration and maintaining their guilt, those including families of the victim. Pam Hobbs, mother of the victim, Stevie Branch, initially believed the Memphis 3 were guilty, but later changed her stance, supporting their release. Mark Byers, stepfather victim Christopher Byers, also reversed his opinion, later believed the real killers had not been found. Todd Moore and Dana Moore, parents of victim Michael Moore, remained firmly against the Memphis 3's release, insisting they are guilty. Some other family members and community members refused to accept new evidence that pointed to wrongful conviction. Law enforcement and prosecutors, former Memphis police officers who worked on the case, stood by the original investigation and opposed the Alford plea. Original prosecutor Brent Davis and former Deputy Prosecutor John Fogman opposed their release, claiming justice had been served. Former Judge David Burnett, who oversaw their trials, consistently denied new appeals and fought efforts to grant them a retrial. State officials and courts. Arkansas Attorney General's office opposed new DNA testing. Efforts to overturn the convictions. The Arkansas Supreme Court initially upheld the convictions despite new evidence. Some local residents and religious groups. Some West Memphis and Arkansas community members who originally believed the 3 were involved in the satanic rituals continued to protest their release. Religious fundamentalists in the area believed Damien Echols, in particular, was guilty due to his interest in the occult and heavy metal music. Public figures who spoke up against them. Ron Lex, private investigator, initially skeptical, later admitted the case was mishandled, but in the legal field still insisted the original convictions were correct. Conservative commentators opposed the release, arguing the Alpha plea still meant that they were guilty in the eyes of the law. Despite the opposition, DNA evidence later showed no physical link between the West Memphis 3 and the crime scene. However, some protesters still insist they were guilty, mainly because their controversial past and false confessions and the emotional weight of the case. The case of the West Memphis 3, Damian Nichols, Jason Baldwin, and Jesse Miscali, had been marked by significant public debates, with some individuals and groups maintaining their guilt despite emerging evidence suggesting otherwise. Family's victims, Todd Moore, Dana Moore, parents of the victim, Michael Moore, they have consistently believed in the guilt of the West Memphis 3 and opposed their release. Now, for judicial officials, Judge David Bonnet presided over the original trial's significant appeals, often denying requests for retrials or new evidence submissions, thereby upholding the original convictions. Prosecutor John Fogelman, instrumental in the original prosecution, he made the stance that the convictions were just, even in the face of new evidence. Community members and religious groups, local residents. In the aftermath of the murders, some community members influenced the prevailing satanic panic were convinced of the trio's guilt due to their interest in alternative music and beliefs. Religious organizations, certain local religious groups viewed the defendants' lifestyles as indicative of guilt and aligning with the narrative of the crime being ritualistic. Social media outlets. Local media. Every coverage by local newspapers and television stations often portrayed the accused in a negative talk, reinforcing public perception of their guilt. Opposition to exoneration efforts. Terry Hobbs, stepfather of the victim Stevie Branch, filed a defamation lawsuit against the singer Natalie Maines for implying his involvement in the murders, inducting his belief in the original convictions. Despite these opposing views, Memphis 3 were released in 2011 after alpha pleas, which allowed them to assert their innocence while acknowledging that the prosecution had enough evidence to convict them. That's some about them. Westboro Baptist Church Beliefs about wrongful convictions, and some information about wrongful convictions. And the information about people who were for and against the Memphis 3. So, hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Bye.